25 lost painting tricks old contractors used before cheap materials took over. A bad paint job does not always fail on the first day. That is what makes it so frustrating. It can look fine when the roller is still wet. The room feels fresh. The porch rail looks clean. The trim shines for a week. Then a corner starts peeling. A door sticks. Brush marks show in the afternoon light. The new color looks thin over the old one. A window sash feels gummy. 6 months later, the house tells the truth. The paint was never the whole job. Old contractors understood that better than almost anyone. In 1962, outside Lancaster, Pennsylvania, a painter stood in front of a weathered back door with a cigarette tucked behind one ear and a rag hanging from his belt. He did not open the paint can first. He ran his hand over the wood. He looked at the bottom edge. He checked where rain had sat, where fingers had touched, where the sun had baked the finish, and where the old paint was still holding. Only then did he start. That was the old difference. The work began before the color. Today, a lot of paint is sold as if it can forgive anything. One coat, fast dry, no prep, covers all, works on everything. And sometimes modern paint is excellent. But no paint, old or new, can turn impatience into craftsmanship. Old painters knew the small habits that made a finish last. Cleaning before sanding, feathering edges, cutting in with a steady hand, letting coats dry, saving the right brush, watching the weather, and refusing to paint over a problem just because the customer wanted it done by Friday. Number 21 explains why old painters trusted their hands before they trusted their eyes. Number 14 is the simple edge habit that made trim look expensive even in a modest house. Number 7 shows why the best painters feared dust more than almost anything. And number 1 may be the most important lost painting trick of all. They treated paint as protection, not decoration. So here are 25 lost painting tricks old contractors used before cheap materials took over. Number 25, reading the surface before opening the can. Old painters did not begin by stirring paint. They began by studying what was already there. A wall, a door, a porch post, or a window frame always had a story. Some areas were dry and sound. Some were glossy from years of hands. Some were chalky from sun. Some were damp near the bottom. Some had old layers that were still tight, while other spots were ready to let go. The old contractor looked for all of that before he committed to the job. He ran his fingers across the surface. He bent close to see cracks. He checked whether old paint was peeling in sheets or only worn thin. He noticed whether a stain came from dirt, water, smoke, grease, or plain age. That habit mattered because different problems need different preparation. Paint does not solve a loose surface. It does not make dirt disappear. It does not turn damp wood into sound wood. It only covers what the worker decided to understand or ignore. Modern paint marketing often starts with coverage. Old painters started with diagnosis. That is why their finished work sometimes lasted longer with simpler materials. They were not asking paint to do the job of judgment. Number 24, washing before sanding. One of the old rules was simple. Do not sand dirt into the work. Before a serious painter smoothed the surface, he cleaned it. Dust, kitchen film, hand oils, soot, porch grime, and old wax could all sit on top of paint or wood. If those things were ground into the surface by sandpaper, the new finish had to bond through a layer of contamination. That is how a job begins failing quietly. In an old kitchen, a painter might wipe cabinet edges where fingers had touched for years. On a porch, he might scrub railings before smoothing them. Around a doorway, he knew the area near the handle needed more attention than the untouched corner near the ceiling. This habit was not glamorous. It was not the part people admired when the job was done, but it made everything after it work better. Old contractors understood sequence. Cleaning came before sanding. Sanding came before dusting. Dusting came before priming. Priming came before finish. Skip the order, and the wall might still look painted, but the job had lost its backbone. Number 23. Feathering old paint edges instead of leaving ridges. When old paint chips away, it often leaves little ledges. A careless painter rolls over those ledges and hopes the new coat hides them. It usually does not. When light hits the wall or trim from the side, every ridge appears like a scar under fresh makeup. Old painters took time to feather those edges. They did not always remove every layer. That would often be unnecessary, and with very old paint, it can also raise safety concerns that need proper testing and professional handling. But where old paint was sound and only the edge had lifted, they eased the transition so the new finish could lie flat. The result looked calmer. A porch rail did not show the ghost of every old chip. A bedroom door did not look like it had been painted over failure. A window frame had a smoother line where the old finish met the new. This trick was really patience with a humble tool. The old contractor knew paint has thickness. Light reveals thickness. And a proud edge under paint will still be proud after paint. Cheap work hides from inspection. Good work prepares for the afternoon sun.
Number 22. Keeping a sharp scraper and using it gently. Old painters respected the scraper. Not as a weapon, but as a listening tool. A dull scraper tears, gouges, and makes a mess. A sharp one can lift loose material with control. The painter could feel whether paint was still holding or whether it had failed. He did not attack the whole surface blindly. He tested, lifted, stopped, and moved on. That kind of control mattered on old houses. Wood trim, porch posts, doors, and windows could be damaged by impatience. Once the worker gouged the surface, the repair became larger than the original problem. The old habit was to remove what was loose without punishing what was sound. There was also an honesty in it. If paint came off easily, it was not ready to be painted over. If it held tight, it did not need to be destroyed just to prove a point. Old contractors worked by condition, not ego. They knew the difference between preparation and damage. Number 21. Trusting the hand test. Old painters used their hands constantly. They ran a palm across a sanded door. They touched a wall after washing. They felt trim for dust. They rubbed old paint to see whether chalk came off. They checked whether a surface felt slick, gritty, damp, or smooth enough for the next step. The hand caught things the eye missed. A wall might look clean but feel greasy. A railing might look smooth but feel rough where the sun had raised the grain. A patch might look flat from across the room but feel like a mound under the fingers. That is why old contractors trusted touch. Paint is visual at the end, but much of the work is tactile before that. The brush, the roller, the sandpaper, the rag, and the surface all speak through the hand. Modern shortcuts often remove that contact. People look at a label, watch a quick video, and hope the product will handle what their hands never checked. The old painter knew better. If the hand did not approve, the eye would eventually find the mistake. Number 20. Dusting twice after sanding. Sanding creates the very thing that can ruin paint: dust. Old painters were almost stubborn about removing it. They brushed it off, wiped it down, let it settle, and checked again. Around trim, corners, window ledges, and baseboards, dust loved to hide. If it stayed there, primer and paint could drag it into the finish. That made rough spots, weak bonding, and little bits under a smooth surface. The old habit was to dust more than once. Not because the painter enjoyed extra work, but because dust keeps moving. It falls from edges. It floats down from molding. It hides in cracks and comes loose when a brush passes over it. You can imagine an old contractor wiping a windowsill, stepping back, then wiping it again before opening the primer. That second wipe was not fussiness. It was insurance. Cheap work treats dust as invisible. Good work treats dust as the enemy of finish. Number 19. Priming the problem, not just the bare spot. Primer was not paint with a less exciting name. Old contractors understood that. They used primer to help new paint bond, to seal patched areas, to even out absorption, and to give the finished coat a better foundation. A bare patch on a wall might drink paint differently than the surrounding surface. Raw wood might pull moisture from the coat. Old stains might try to return. Primer gave the job a more honest start. The trick was not dumping primer everywhere without thought. It was knowing where the surface needed help. A patched crack might need it. A repaired door edge might need it. Weathered exterior wood might need it. Glossy old trim might need the right preparation and bonding layer before it accepted a new finish. Old painters thought in layers. Modern impatience often thinks in color. But color is only the last thing the viewer sees. Underneath it are the decisions that decide whether that color stays. Stop the count for a moment. Look at what these first 7 tricks are really saying. The old painter was not magical. He was observant. He read the surface. He cleaned before sanding. He softened ridges. He used a scraper with control. He trusted his hand. He fought dust. He primed where the surface needed help. None of that makes a dramatic advertisement. But it is the reason a painted door can still look decent years later while a rushed one fails before the next season. The next tricks move into brushes, edges, coats, and timing, where old contractors turned ordinary paint into work that looks steady instead of slapped on. Number 18. Straining paint before a fine finish. Old painters knew that even good paint could carry little troublemakers. Dry bits from the rim. Skin from a can that had been opened before. Dust from storage. Small lumps that did not belong in a smooth coat. On rough outdoor work, those bits might not matter much. On trim doors, cabinets, or fine interior work, they could ruin the finish. So the painter strained the paint when the job called for it. Not every time, not for every surface, and not as a ceremony. But when a smooth door or clean trim line mattered, he removed the grit before it reached the brush. This habit shows how old contractors controlled problems early. It is easier to strain paint than to pick dried bits out of wet trim. It is easier to keep a finish clean than to fix a finish after it is spoiled. Modern DIY often focuses on the exciting moment, color going on the wall. Old painters paid attention to the quiet moment before that, when the work could still be protected. Number 17. Loading the brush without drowning it. A good painter's brush was not a mop. Old contractors loaded a brush with enough paint to flow, but not so much that it dripped, sagged, or flooded the edge. They tapped or worked off the excess with control. They kept the paint in the lower part of the bristles instead of burying the whole brush to the handle. This mattered because overload creates mess. It leaves heavy corners, runs under trim, thick ridges at edges, and paint creeping where it should not go. Too little paint creates dragging, dry strokes, and uneven coverage. The trick lived between those extremes. An old painter learned the weight of a loaded brush. He could feel when it was right. That is why his work seemed calm. The brush was not starving and not drowning. It was carrying enough paint to do the stroke cleanly. Cheap brushes and rushed work make this harder. But the old principle remains: control starts before the bristles touch the surface. Number 16. Keeping a wet edge. One of the classic old painting habits was keeping a wet edge. That means working so each new stroke or roller pass blends into paint that is still fresh, instead of partly dried. When the edge dries too far, the next pass can leave lap marks, stripes, and uneven sheen. Old painters managed the wall in sections. They did not wander randomly around the room. They knew where a natural break was: a corner, a door frame, a window, a piece of trim. They worked steadily toward that break so the finish could flow together. This was especially important in rooms with strong light. A wall might look fine while wet, then show lap marks the next morning when sunlight crossed it. The old contractor painted with that future light in mind. Keeping a wet edge is not glamorous. It is rhythm. It comes from planning the path before the roller starts. Number 15. Cutting in with patience instead of tape worship. Old painters could cut a clean line because they practiced. Tape existed, of course, and masking has its place. But experienced painters did not believe tape replaced skill. Around ceiling lines, trim, windows, doors, and baseboards, they used a steady brush, a controlled load, and a patient hand. The trick was not speed. It was confidence built from repetition. A clean-cut line makes a room feel finished even when no one knows why. A wavy line between wall and trim can make expensive paint look cheap. A careful edge can make modest materials look professional. Old contractors understood that edges tell on the worker. The broad wall may impress at first, but the eye eventually travels to the corners, the casing, the baseboard, and the ceiling line. That is where the discipline shows. This is why number 15 belongs near the middle of the list. A paint job is judged by its edges. Number 14. Painting trim from the top down. Old painters liked order. On trim work, that often meant working from top to bottom: crown before casing, upper details before lower rails, window tops before sills, baseboards near the end. The exact sequence changed with the job, but the principle stayed the same. Gravity is always working. Dust falls. Drips fall. Hands touch lower areas more often. If lower trim is finished first, it may be spoiled while the upper work is still happening. By working in a sensible order, the painter protected what was already done. This habit also kept the mind organized. Instead of jumping from one attractive piece to another, the contractor moved through the room like a system. The room became less chaotic. Mistakes were easier to see. Touch-ups were easier to track. A homeowner might not notice the method, but they noticed the calm result. Number 13. Removing hardware instead of painting around it. Old contractors knew when to take things off. Door knobs, latches, strike plates, hooks, house numbers, cabinet pulls, switch plates, small brackets. If they could be removed safely and sensibly, taking them off often made the finish cleaner. Painting around hardware is faster. It also leaves halos, ridges, stuck edges, and little half-moon marks that announce the shortcut every time light hits them. In an old house, hardware had dignity. Brass, steel, porcelain, glass, and even plain old screws were part of the character of the place. Slopping paint over them made the whole job feel careless. The old trick was simple: remove what should not be painted, keep the screws together, and put the pieces back after the finish had properly dried. It took extra minutes, but it made the difference between a room that looked refreshed and a room that looked covered. Number 12. Labeling doors and hardware as they came off. This was the quiet partner to number 13. Old contractors labeled things. If several doors came off their hinges, they marked where each one belonged. If hardware was removed from different rooms, screws and plates were kept together. A piece of tape, a pencil mark in a hidden spot, or an envelope with a room name could save hours of frustration later. Older houses are rarely perfectly interchangeable. A door that fits one opening may rub in another. A hinge screw may have its own worn path. A latch may line up only because it has lived in that exact place for 40 years. The old painter respected that. He did not toss everything into one coffee can and hope Monday would sort itself out. Labeling was not clerical work. It was craftsmanship protecting itself. It kept the job from becoming chaos after the pretty part was done. Number 11. Letting coats dry instead of rushing to shine. Old painters respected drying time. They knew paint could feel dry on the surface while still being soft underneath. They knew a second coat put on too soon could drag, wrinkle, dull, or trap problems under a skin that looked finished. Waiting was part of the job. Not wasted time. On humid days, drying slowed. In cold rooms, drying changed. On glossy trim, patience mattered. A rush door might look painted in the afternoon and stick to the jamb that night. Old contractors learned these lessons the hard way, and the good ones remembered. Today, fast dry promises can make waiting feel old-fashioned. But the chemistry still needs respect. The surface may be modern, the can may be new, and the label may sound confident, but paint still has to become a film. Number 11 is a hard trick for impatient people. Let the coat become what it is supposed to be before asking it to carry another one. Stop again and notice the pattern. These middle tricks are about control. Control the paint before it reaches the brush. Control the amount on the bristles. Control the edge before it dries. Control the line where two colors meet. Control the order of the room. Control the hardware. Control the drying time. That was the old contractor's advantage. He did not depend on one heroic product. He controlled the little moments that decide whether a room looks professionally painted or merely colored in. The next tricks are about weather, light, wood, and the small conditions that old painters watched before they trusted a finish. Number 10. Watching the weather before painting outside. Exterior paint lives outdoors. Old contractors never forgot that. They watched heat, cold, humidity, direct sun, wind, dew, and rain. They knew a porch rail painted in harsh sun could skin over too fast. They knew damp wood could betray the job. They knew evening dew could settle on a finish that had not had enough time. The old painter did not only ask, "Is it raining?" He asked what the day was doing. Was the surface too hot? Was moisture hiding in shaded wood? Would the temperature drop too quickly after sunset? Would dust blow across the work? Was the morning side of the house better than the afternoon side? This habit mattered because exterior painting is a partnership with weather. The painter may control the brush, but the day controls the drying conditions. Cheap work paints when the schedule says paint. Good work paints when the house and weather are ready. Number 9. Following the shade around the house. Old exterior painters often worked with the shade. They did not always stand in the hottest sun just because that side was next on the ladder. If possible, they planned the day so they could work where the surface was not being punished by direct heat. This made the paint handle better. A cooler surface gives paint more time to level. The brush moves differently. The worker sees better. The finish has a better chance to settle before the weather attacks it. This habit also protected the painter. A man painting siding in July knew the sun was not only hard on paint. It was hard on the body. The old contractor paced the job because exhaustion makes sloppy hands. Following shade sounds almost too simple to call a trick. But many lasting trades are built from simple things done at the right time. Number 8. Painting end grain and bottom edges carefully. Old painters paid attention to the parts people rarely look at. The bottom of a door. The underside of a porch rail. The end grain of wood trim. The lower edge of siding. Places where water could sit, wick, or sneak in. Those areas matter because wood often fails where moisture enters unnoticed. A beautiful front face does not protect a door if the bottom edge is raw and drinking damp air. A railing can peel from underneath while the top still looks fine. Trim can begin failing at an end cut long before the middle shows trouble. Old contractors knew paint was not only appearance. It was a protective skin. So they sealed the vulnerable edges when the job allowed it. They slowed down on the places the homeowner might never praise because those places decided how long the work lasted. This is one of the clearest differences between show work and real work. Show work paints what the eye sees. Real work protects what the weather finds. Number 7. Keeping dust and insects out of fresh paint. Fresh paint attracts trouble. Dust settles into it. Insects land in it. Wind carries bits across it. Hair from a cheap brush can stay behind like a signature nobody wanted. Old painters watched for that. They chose calmer hours when possible. They kept the work area swept. They avoided stirring up dust right before a finish coat. They protected wet trim from traffic. They checked the brush before a loose bristle became part of the door. In a house full of children, pets, open windows, and summer air, this took discipline. The painter might close a room for a while. He might ask people not to pass through. He might paint a door flat when possible so the finish could level without catching everything floating by. Number 7 matters because final coats are unforgiving. Preparation can be perfect, but one dusty hour can make the finish feel cheap. Old contractors treated the fresh coat like something fragile until it proved otherwise. Number 6. Saving the good brush for the right job. Old painters had brushes they cared about. Not every brush did every job. A worn rough brush might be fine for primer on weathered boards. A better angled brush was saved for trim, sash, doors, and clean lines. The finest brush was not abused in a dirty can or left standing in paint overnight. The brush held the painter's skill. A cheap, abused brush makes clean work harder. It leaves tracks, sheds bristles, carries paint unevenly, and fights the hand. A good brush, cleaned and stored properly, becomes familiar. The painter knows how it bends, how much paint it carries, and where its edge is. This was part of old tool respect. Contractors who took care of brushes were taking care of tomorrow's work. They cleaned them, shaped them, wrapped them, and hung them or stored them so the bristles did not splay. Today, disposable tools make it easy to forget that a brush can be a companion in the work. Old painters did not forget. Number 5. Boxing paint for consistent color. When a job required more than one can of the same color, old painters sometimes mixed those cans together in a larger container before painting. This was called boxing the paint. The reason was simple. Even cans with the same label can vary slightly, especially across batches. If one wall is painted from one can and the next wall from another, the difference may not appear until the light changes. By combining the cans, the painter made one consistent supply. This mattered on larger rooms, exterior walls, fences, and siding. It was a small habit that prevented a large disappointment. The old contractor knew the human eye is better at seeing unevenness than people expect. A tiny color shift across a broad surface can make the work look patched even when the technique was good. Boxing paint did not require expensive equipment. It required foresight. Before the final 4, pause for one more thought. Most people judge paint by color. Old contractors judged paint by behavior. Did it bond? Did it level? Did it protect the edge? Did it dry under the right conditions? Did the sheen stay even? Did the trim line hold? Did the door close without sticking? Did the finish survive weather, hands, dust, and time? That is why their work felt different. They were not only decorating a surface. They were building a finish. Number 4. Using light to inspect the work. Old painters knew that straight-on light can lie. A wall may look smooth when viewed directly, then reveal every ridge when light comes from the side. Trim may look clean in a dim room, then show brush marks the next morning. A patch may seem invisible until the afternoon sun crosses it. So painters changed their angle. They looked along the wall, not only at it. They checked trim from the side. They waited to see how daylight treated the work. Some carried a simple work light to reveal flaws before the final coat. This habit mattered because paint is judged in the light where it lives. A dining room wall must survive evening lamps. A hallway must survive light from the door. A porch post must survive low sun. The old painter inspected the job the way the house would inspect it later. Cheap work hopes the customer does not look too closely. Good work looks closely first. Number 3. Knowing when not to paint. This may be the least profitable trick on the list, which is why it was one of the most honest. Old contractors knew when paint was the wrong answer. If wood was rotten, paint would not restore it. If water was entering somewhere, paint would not stop the cause. If a surface was too damp, too dirty, too loose, or too unstable, a fresh coat would only postpone the complaint. A good painter had to be willing to say so. That took character. Because there is always pressure to cover the problem and move on. The homeowner wants it done. The schedule is tight. The weather window is short. The can is open. The color is chosen. But old tradesmen knew their reputation lived longer than the wet shine. Painting over failure turns the painter into a liar, even if the lie looks pretty for a month. Number 2. Leaving a job cleaner than the paint made it. Old contractors understood that the finished room included the cleanup. Drop cloths folded. Paint rims wiped. Lids sealed. Hardware back where it belonged. Windows unstuck. Doors checked before they dried shut. Floors cleaned of specks. Brushes washed. Ladders moved without scraping walls. Leftover paint labeled for the homeowner. None of that appears in the color chart. But it changes how the work feels. A room can have decent paint and still feel careless if the hinges are smeared, the floor is dotted, the outlet plates are stuck, and the leftover can is crusted shut with no label. Old contractors knew that people remember the way a worker leaves the house. Good cleanup also protected the job. A lid sealed properly keeps touch-up paint useful. A labeled can saves confusion years later. A checked window does not become painted shut. A door tested at the right time does not stick all night. Number 2 is about pride after the visible part is over. The job is not done when the brush stops moving. Number 1. Treating paint as protection, not decoration. The greatest lost painting trick was a way of thinking. Old contractors did not see paint as color alone. They saw it as a protective system. Paint guarded wood from moisture. It made trim easier to clean. It sealed patched areas. It helped a porch survive sun and rain. It gave a door a skin against hands, weather, and daily wear. It made a house look cared for because it was cared for underneath. That is why the old painter cared about the boring parts. Cleaning, scraping, sanding, dusting, priming, drying, edges, weather, shade, hardware, light, cleanup. Those were not delays before the real work. They were the real work. The color was the reward at the end. Cheap materials did not destroy painting by themselves. Some modern materials are better than anything an old contractor had. What changed was the promise that a product could replace patience, that one coat could replace preparation, that a label could replace judgment, and that speed could replace care. The old painter knew better. He knew a house remembers shortcuts. A door remembers whether its bottom edge was sealed. A wall remembers whether it was dusty. Trim remembers whether the hardware was removed. A porch remembers whether it was painted in harsh sun. A window remembers whether it was checked before the sash stuck shut. Think back to that painter outside Lancaster in 1962. He has not opened the can yet. He is looking at the door. He is touching the edge where rain sits. He is studying the old finish. He is deciding what must be cleaned, what must be scraped, what must be left alone, and what must be protected before color ever touches wood. To someone in a hurry, it looks like wasted time. To a real painter, it is the job beginning correctly. That is the old value worth keeping. Attention before action. Preparation before beauty. Protection before color. Pride after cleanup. If this reminded you of an old painter, a father with a favorite brush, a grandfather who never painted over loose wood, or a contractor who could cut a line without tape, tell us what painting habit you remember from the old days. Because sometimes the best paint job in an old house was not the one with the newest color. It was the one where every hidden step was done as if the house itself would know.